know, if you travel around this country, you'll notice that it ain't all this and it ain't all that. But it is a little bit of everything. All kinds of places and all kinds of people together.
Hey, it's Justin Kelly and Laura Starling, the Old Boots podcast, another episode. And we're really excited because today we have Camille and Jeff Moss on from North Carolina. Hey, guys.
Hi, how are you?
They are the authors of a book called My Leading Edge, but they also have quite a life story because, man, you guys have been through a lot and seen a lot. And I guess we want to start kind of at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early lives.
Sure. You want to go first?
Well, I grew up in Cairo, down in Southwest Georgia, and went to the University of Georgia, pharmacy school. And Jeff and I met after my freshman year at Georgia.
She's older than I am. 9 months, but we won't talk about that. So
Shame on you, Jeff. Shame on you.
So Camille, as she said, grew up in Cairo, Georgia. I grew up in Plains, Georgia. I was the son of Bobby and Betty Moss, and my dad ran the experiment station for the University of Georgia in Plains. They moved there in 1961. Dad was a Korea War veteran. He was a P-51 and F-86 crew chief in Korea. Interestingly, he had obtained his 4-year degree from Georgia before he enlisted in the Air Force and got sent to Korea. So when he came back, ironically, he got stationed in Albany, Georgia, and that's where he met my mom on a blind date. And that's a whole nother funny story, but Mom swore she'd never do a blind date again, which meant she had done some in the past. But her friend begged her to go on this date because she was dating one of my dad's friends. So they go on a date. The rest is history. They went back to Elberton, Georgia, near Athens. Dad went back to Georgia and got his master's degree in agronomy and ag economics. Was a county agent for a minute, and they moved down to Plains in 1961. So you can tell where the first part of this story is going. He met this peanut farmer named Jimmy Carter at that juncture, and they began to form a friendship. So my growing up in Plains and my interest in aviation really started way back then because I was a 12-year-old kid in 1976. Plains was a small town of 600 and so people. So, like Gray and other areas, small town, we know what that looks like. It's small town USA. You've got 600 mamas. You've got one biological mom and 599 other moms. So, very hard to get away with anything in small town USA. The party line's ringing and you're getting sold out. This was before cell phones and videos, right? So they didn't need them back then. You just get on the party line and everybody in town knows your business. As Andy Griffith once said, telegraph, telegram, or tell Floyd. Everybody knows what's going on in Mayberry. But so I'm 12 and President Carter, at that point he'd become senator, governor, and then president. And I'm just a kid. And it kind of falls short on you at that age to realize it's a big deal, but I don't think you realize how big a deal it is until you have this gift called perspective. Right. And perspective allows us to always look back on situations. So I grew up in the middle of that. We had trouble getting back and forth to school because, on any given day in Plains, 15 to 25,000 tourists would come in on the town, and we had to take back roads to, dirt roads, getting back and forth to school in Americas because it was just jam-packed. But the helicopters fascinated me. And, President Carter would come in, he'd, take Air Force One into Warner Robins Air Force Base, and then they would bring him in on Chinook helicopters and Marine One, and they flew right over the top of our house on the final approach to land at the ball field that was near his home. So again, nirvana, 12-year-old kid, and here come these helicopters over the roof of your house, and the whole house is shaking and vibrating, and you're jumping on your bike to ride that half mile to get to the LZ where they would land. And, generally, I'd show up and the blades would finally, they would be in the final few rotations, the doors would open, and President Carter and Ms. Rosalind would, and it's Rosalind, by the way. Everybody listen to the podcast. When you hear somebody say Rosalind, they don't know her. Her name is Rosalind. So, they would exit the helicopter. So I spent, 4 years in that nirvana of having a president of the United States living right around the corner. And I think it's another interesting thing to note for those of us that knew President Carter. I don't like to talk about his politics because as a 12-year-old to 16-year-old, I really didn't care. What I can tell you is he was the finest former president this country has ever seen in terms of what he did for humanity. Habitat for Humanity homes going up. I mean, he put Habitat Humanity on the map. He did so much work in the world, Nobel Peace Prize winner, et cetera. So my time with President Carter really went forward from there. But getting back to how we met, at 18, I graduate from Southland Academy in Americas. And at that point, I took a job as a summer youth worker at Cairo Methodist Church down in Cairo, Georgia. My brother was a dentist there. And I go down, and apparently she now confides that she was there the Sunday they introduced me months before the summer started. The first Sunday morning, I'm teaching the college-age Sunday school class, and I'm a little unnerved because I just graduated from high school, so they're all older than me. And
Right.
two people show up. She's one of them, and I find out that her dad made her come. Now, the interesting part is her dad was the head of the Pastor Parish Relations Committee that hired me. So he's like not going to have his daughter be a no-show for Sunday school and that the word get out that, Carter Morton's child doesn't even show up. I'm not coming either. So we met that Sunday morning, and I made up a cock and bull story of, being down here and out of sorts and don't know my way around. What, will you go on a date? I didn't use the word date. I said, would you mind taking me around, show me around, right? And she fell for it. And then, years later, she goes, "Oh, I had my eye on you when I saw you, when I saw you that Sunday before." So truth be told, the romance was born in about 1983. Michael Jackson was a hit. I mean, we would ride around, listen to Beat It and all the great, Billie Jean. And we all remember when he moonwalked across the stage at the Motown Awards, right? And everybody's heart stopped. Did you see that? So that kind of gives you an idea of, where we're from, Cairo and Plains, and how we met. And frankly, we started dating that summer and just never stopped.
We're still together.
We're still together. 4 years of dating through, she was at Valdosta State for a year. I'm at ABAC, of course, in Tipton for a year. And then we both transferred up to the University of Georgia and somehow survived dating in that environment for another 3 years. And then we got married in Cairo in 1987. So that's more or less how we got this thing started.
Well,
Wow.
that's a real romance right there. That's kind of reminiscent of Jimmy and Rosalind. Oh, I'm sorry,
Rosalind.
Rosalind.
Rosalind. I wanted to make sure I threw that in there for you.
You just did that for emphasis, Laura.
So you dated and you got married, and what about family?
Well,
From there.
I think we probably should, in terms of the book and the course of the book, I was studying agronomy, and I literally wanted to take my dad's place at the University of Georgia Ag Experiment Station in Plains. And I think it's fair to be honest that I was not a good student in high school. I liked doing anything but studying, and by now, Mom and Dad were tired. So I always like to tell people I was a Sunday afternoon that got out of hand because my brother's 9 years older than me, my sister's 6 years older than me, and I just kind of showed up unexpectedly. So that happens. And mom and dad, I guess they were probably tired, and I got to do whatever I wanted to do.
And your mom says you put every gray hair on her head that she has. Yeah.
That's 100%.
It's all you.
I was a very mischievous child on that farm, but I thought the farm was ours. Literally growing up, my first 9 years were lived on that farm, and then we moved into the house in Plains, closer to the city limits, pretty close to my 9th birthday. So I was just running free on the farm. Dad had me as a spare hand. I'm driving trucks and tractors and things, today would probably wind you up in court. He'd put a couple of Sears and Roebuck catalogs under my behind and behind me so I could reach the pedals. And when the farm hands were laying irrigation pipe or doing whatever, it meant all the adults were on the ground, and Jeff will drive. I can drive the truck and trailer straight while they do it. So Daddy had me engaged in agriculture early on, and I was dreaming of replacing him. Well, the University of Georgia decided that only a PhD could have that job. Dad had a master's, and being someone that did not love school, I had no intention of staying in and getting a PhD in agriculture in order to live in Plains, Georgia, and do that. So, it kept coming back to I loved helicopters and flying. So I went by the Air Force ROTC building. It's on Ag Hill, or down at the base of Ag Hill on the University of Georgia campus. And I walk by it every day going between Plant Sciences and Connor Hall up on the hill. And oh, by the way, the pharmacy school is right across the street. I walked in there and said, hey, what does it take to be a cadet? And, they naturally signed me up. It was winter quarter of my sophomore year. And they started putting me through a barrage of tests, academic, flying, and physical measurements and all. And they measured me in the sitting height. So the way that looked was they, stretched a tape measure from the bottom of my rear end up to the top of my head. And I'm just sitting there, probably slumped over. I had no idea what they were measuring for. And they called me in like a week later and said, hey, you're a half inch too short in the sitting height to be a pilot in the Air Force. But hey, we can make you a missile command operator. And I said, well, what does that look like? And the guy described it, and it was a little underwhelming. And I'm just like, the heck with this.
Well, Jeff is not somebody that can sit still. That's not his forte.
You probably already figured that out.
That would not have worked for him.
That would not happen, because it's like you go into this silo and you sit there and you're waiting on the command to turn the keys together to launch a nuke. And that doesn't sound exciting to me. I want to be a pilot. So I told Camille's in the middle of all of this, and we detail it in the book, because when I first go in, tell her what I want to do, she bursts into tears. And that's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. That's kind of a setback. But she wasn't thinking about flying as much as being in the military. Her dad was not.
And the dangers.
And the dangers that come with that. And, that's pretty much true of military service for most people. If it's a family lineage kind of deal, it becomes very much a patriotic move. But if it's something new to you, it's scary and unknown. So when I found out I couldn't fly in the Air Force, I went over to Army ROTC. And truly, that was a huge pivotal change in my life, because they gave me an opportunity, and it had nothing to do with the way the Air Force did things. And I think we really get into some detail about this in the book, and I'll clarify what I mean by that in a second. But it was, you have an opportunity to not only be a pilot, but you can earn a 2-year full ride scholarship. And all you've got to do is go to this camp at Fort Knox, Kentucky this summer for 6 weeks. And if you do well, you're on your path. But we don't guarantee. The Air Force guarantees you before you contract what you're going to do. The Army, you've got to earn it. And it's all based on an order of merit list and how you perform. But I had been raised, and this is a clarity I want to bring, everything Daddy taught me to do was task, condition, standard. Those weren't his words. But everything has a right way of doing it. The way you hook an implement to a tractor, the way you drive, checking tire pressures, everything was always, here's how you do it. And if you follow the process, you might not always have success, but the chances of success are greater. So I go back to her dorm room and say, hey, I'm going to Fort Knox for 6 weeks. to this basic camp to make up for the 2 years of ROTC I missed. And once again, she wasn't enamored with that idea because you kind of had something coming up.
Yeah.
You want to tell them about that? That was
Well, I had surgery scheduled for that summer, and my mouth was going to be wired shut for 7 weeks. And so it was actually, on one hand, looking back, it was a good thing that he was gone. But then communication was a problem. We didn't have cell phones. We couldn't text. So
you said I did most of the talking, and that
just like today, he did most of the talking. I listened.
It hasn't changed.
And it works
much.
for us.
So, yeah, it works. So I had to go to Fort Knox and do that deal, and I performed well. I mean, interestingly, in the Army, it's the same thing. Everything is task, condition, standard, and that's where I learned that phraseology, because they tell you what the conditions are by which you have to perform in order to do anything. And so the task is to do this. The conditions in which you're doing it are like now it's raining or whatever, the weather's perfect, but the conditions for success are measured by the following, and everything was enumerated. So it kind of just fell right into my wheelhouse to be able to follow the logic behind it and to perform. And a lot of those kids that were there just didn't come up the way I did. So, Daddy, he was my original leading edge, and that's where the title of the book kind of starts. It blends from there because Dad was the epitome of servant leader. Daddy was the guy that everybody in town respected and held in high esteem, because when Bobby Moss said something, you could take it to the bank. That's the way we came up. A lot of these kids I was competing with didn't have that depth of knowledge or experience behind them. So I was kind of hunting on a baited field. I mean, go out to the rifle range with a kid that's been shooting since he could hold a firearm, for example, or to navigate through the woods with no fear, because we'd spent a lot of time quail hunting and be in the woods. I was just in my element. And so it's funny how God has a way of putting you where you need to be, and then frankly putting you with the people you need to be with in order to be successful, those that are going to lead, guide, and mentor you. And my life has been quite full of those individuals. I've learned something from everybody I've worked for, from the worst leaders to the best, because even the worst leaders do something right. They also show you what not to do, which is interesting. So there we are at Georgia. I'm now engrossed in Army ROTC. I come back, I get the scholarship. Everything's great, but now I've got to pass a flight physical, a flight aptitude test, and I've got to go to this thing called advanced camp at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the summer between our junior and senior year, and excel there. So it's like everything is graded. We continue to date through all of this, and I was working 2 jobs at Georgia. That's another amazing change that I see in a lot of young people today, in terms of work ethic. And what I was doing ROTC, working 2 jobs, taking a full load of classes, and somehow, staying on top of things. And so was Camille. I mean, she was working a job, but staying in pharmacy school, trying to stay ahead of things, and dating. It was a lot. And I don't know that I ever got task saturation. But I mean, with a lot of young folks today, if they're doing more than one thing, they're task saturated and they can't function.
They start freaking out. Yes, I deal with that every day.
all of us as small business owners know about this, or even, leaders in even corporate America. It's a whole new game out there. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but it's just, again, a pivotal moment of how do we lead this generation that got the participation award and think they deserve the keys to the executive washroom their first day on the job. But we're there, and have you got any questions about that so far?
No, so you left UGA and you're headed, and now you're in Fort Bragg. Is that right?
Yeah, I had it. So the summer between my junior and senior year, I went to Fort Bragg, and I write about in the book one of my sergeant majors. His name's Harvey Byram. He's still alive, and I love the man. I talk to him frequently, but he was the ultimate tormentor. I like to point out the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and you remember the little private going down the sidewalk, and the sergeant major's coming at him. He's like, "Good morning, Sergeant Major."
Oh, yeah.
How the hell do you know what kind of morning it is, soldier? You know, and then you see the guy getting more and more nervous every time. That was Sergeant Major Byram. He had us so wrapped up. It was unbelievable. But perspective, he was prepping us to go do well at camp. And then we had to take weight training for fitness under Coach Sam Mervos. He is a legend at the University of Georgia and somebody everybody loved. He was wired like Harvey Byram, but Coach Mervos had a lisp. So he would scream at us and call us cadet. You're the worst bunch of cadets I've ever seen, you know, and we're scared to death. And, you know, you don't laugh at a legend, right? But Mervos was just a beast. And man, he had us running the steps at the University at Sanford Stadium, up and down those steps, sideways, backwards. And we would, I mean, it was just a grueling junior year of college getting ready for camp. And boy, we were prepared. Go to advanced camp and the same things apply. And I've got all this pressure on me because I won't get branched aviation unless I'm the top graduate. And then on top of that, you've got to meet all these physical and test requirements. Oh, yeah. So if you don't finish number one or at the top, you don't even have a prayer because it's such a challenging branch of the Army to get in. But the qualification trials are huge. So I went there knowing it, and here's where I got advantaged. That previous summer at Fort Knox, we had real Army drill sergeants training us. So I had an advantage that I didn't, again, know at the time, perspective. We're going to say that word about 600 times before this is over. I go, and the cadets that were with me, very few of them had been through basic camp like I had because they've been in ROTC all 4 years. And I knew what it was like to live in the barracks. I knew what it was like to have to do PT every morning and all the things associated with being, quote unquote, in the real Army world. And it just fell naturally on me. So I, again, began performing. And one thing, you know, I hope young folks listen to this podcast. The thing that was interesting is if you told me what I had to do to max a particular event, then I knew what to train to and to exceed that training. So if you told me I had to run the 2 mile in whatever it was, 14 minutes, then I trained to make sure I could run it in 13, give myself some breathing room. And I was a 2 miler in high school. So that was another area where I had an advantage. I was a long distance runner, so I had no problem with that. Rifle range, no problem. Land navigation and all the other graded areas, I was ready for it. And I maxed 100% of everything they threw at me. And in fact, on the land navigation course, instead of walking it, I ran it. And they thought I had cheated. It was I turned in my scorecard because, you know, you're finding all these targets in the woods, like it's almost like a balloon hanging from a tree with a number written on it. And you're going through there with a compass. And I jogged the whole course. I finished it in record time, come back in, and they thought I cheated. And when the cadre, the folks that are running camp came together, they said, "Oh, no, we saw him. He ran the entire course. He didn't walk it." So finished first, record time, everything's lining up. And I'm having the camp of my lifetime, right? I'm feeling it. I'm going to get a chance to be an Army aviator. So the belief started kind of coming into play. And it's just the facts of how things happen. So they also graded us on our leadership skills. So all the cadre that were working had a blue card with 16 leadership dimensions on it. And you got graded every time you were put in any, you know, particular role. Oh, yeah. And your peers also evaluated you. So if you were slipping by on one side and your peers hated you, you know, it was going to balance out and offset. So it was really important in that environment to learn how to get along with other people and to, you know, be a team player, if you will, because you didn't want to get smoked on a peer eval and everything else. So at the end of camp, we were like in the last week, I got called to the cadre office and was shocked beyond belief to find out that I was actually going to be the top graduate of the cycle of my company. And they ran 2 companies in each cycle. And what they told me was, you've got to go for this interview tomorrow, and you're going to be interviewing with a board of officers and non-commissioned officers, because they've got to pick between you and the guy in the other company to determine who's going to be the #1 graduate in the cycle. Here we go, South Georgia Plains. I'm like, interview, prepare. I didn't know what to think, so I called back to Georgia, and I got a lady named Miss Diane Perry. She was the admin for the ROTC department on the phone, and told her what was going on. I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, let me try to get a hold of Major Gentry. So the next thing I know, Major Gentry's walking into barracks and grabbed me up, went and got my uniform pressed, got me a fresh haircut, did all the things necessary. And I go to the interview, and I walk in, and this cadet I'm interviewing against looks like G.I. Joe. Big, huge, muscled up guy with a flat top, and I'm standing there at 130 pounds of nothing. I'm only 5'7", I'm a little small guy. And I'm thinking, I'm getting ready to get smoked. And
Dynamite comes in small packages, man. Dynamite comes in small packages.
That's right, Justin. That's right.
The guy opens his mouth, and I immediately noticed that you're the most arrogant human being I've ever met in my life. And if you go in there acting this way, I'm just going to bring small town South Georgia and be me. And that was what Major Gentry had told me to do. He said, Jeff, just go be yourself. Just answer their questions. It's going to be all right. Well, that's exactly what happened. I went in, interviewed, and then I graduated. And I'll let you tell the rest of it. Camille loves telling this because it's absolutely true. I cannot deny it. So you can pick it up from there.
What he's referring to is his graduation from advanced camp, and his mom and dad and I drove up for it, and no one was more proud than I was. I mean, I was very proud of Jeff for what he had accomplished. But I can tell you that when we climbed into his little yellow Toyota Corolla with no air conditioning to head home, I had to kind of prick that balloon. His head was so big, there wasn't room for me in the car. I had to bring him down a little bit.
I was Puff the Magic Dragon. And again, perspective. When I look back on it, I get it, because when I signed that contract, a year prior, I was betting on the farm, because if I didn't achieve and do what I needed to do, then I was going to get branched to do something in the Army I had no interest in doing. It's not to say it's bad, but it wasn't my dream. So when I finished as high as I did at that advanced camp, I knew unless I messed up on the physical, which I couldn't control, or something else happened, I was going to get Army aviation as a branch. It was still the needs of the Army, so it could still boil down to, we've got too many Army aviators in this accession group, so therefore, it was still risk. But yeah, when I got into that mustard yellow Toyota and she's driving home, I'm thinking I'm the king of the highway, baby. I have gotten the prize, and she had to deflate my ego a bit, which she can do. Wives are good at that. At that point, she's just my girlfriend. She's already in training. But we got back to Georgia, and I was named the Cadet Battalion Commander, and that's another one of my favorite things. When Heartbreak Ridge comes out, if you remember that movie with Clint Eastwood, and the lieutenant standing in front of him and said, did the major tell you that I was the battalion commander of my ROTC detachment in college? And Clint Eastwood looks at him and says, no, sir, but I'll sleep better at night knowing that. I just go, oh my God, did I ever say that out loud? And I'm fairly confident I didn't, but it just flew. I mean, when you see stuff like that, you go, oh my God, that was me. I hope I never said something like that to anybody. But you kind of go through this stuff, and now all I had to do is graduate. I had to finish that year, graduate from Georgia.
But the point is that when the Army said, okay, these are the standards you need to meet, and this is what you need to do, you did it. You laid it out, you knew what you had to do, and you did it to accomplish the goal.
It was a relentless pursuit to get what I wanted to do and to set that goal. So again, I'm hoping young people are watching this because that's how you get anything in life. If you know the task condition standard and you know what you want to do and you can set that mark and prepare beyond that. You know, I wish I could go back and dial back time and go back to high school and actually be a serious student. I would look at it differently now because my first year of college, I was sucking wind trying to make up for all of that. So
Right.
the secret in that was having a mom that always told me I could climb a mountain. And then when I met Camille, I wanted to be something special to her, something bigger and better. You know, it wasn't about, at that point, my goals changed. I wish I had met her earlier and maybe I would have taken my academics more seriously in high school. I wasn't a horrible student, but I wasn't good, you know. I mean, it's not great. We found a bunch of report cards back at home and I was showing them to my son. It's like, see, Dad wasn't a serious student. And his eyes got that big. And I said, yeah, you know, every report card.
Tell him you picked up some and you were like, A. And we're like, I was pretty good. I was better.
Actually, I found some report cards from the 12th grade, and I was like, doggone, I must have gotten a little more serious.
better than I thought.
And then when I peeled it open, it was my brother's. So, you know, that explained everything. But I did get branched aviation. In the fall, they announced it, and I was told I was going to go to flight school unless something broke between now and then. And by that, I mean physically. I mean, you had to be almost a perfect specimen. You had to have 20/20 vision, for example. If your eyes happened to go bad and you needed glasses, you didn't get to go. There was always this one more thing, and the other thing that stood between me and that was this stupid class called physics, which, you know, I took it winter quarter because I was worried I was going to fail it, and if I did, I needed spring quarter to take it again, and I probably should have failed that class. How I got a C in physics is beyond. See, she's shaking her head because she
probably did some of the work for you, didn't she?
I don't know.
No, but she saw my test scores and she knew I should have failed. So it was by the grace of God I got a C in that class. I think the instructor felt sorry for me because I was going to his office a couple afternoons a week and trying really, really hard to pass the class. When I finished, Laura, it's, you know, when you take your final and they post your scores, my score wasn't posted. It was C me. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I have failed physics. This is going to be bad. And I went to his office and he goes, hey, I'm giving you a C for this course because you worked so hard, but your final exam was quite interesting. Maybe you can take physics again somewhere down the road. But I got through. And the other class, it nearly derailed me. I was a science student. I knew how to study science, you know, chemistry and all the, you know, botanies and all that. I had to take American history on North Campus, which is where all the intellectuals hang out. And that course almost blew me up too, because I know how to study that stuff. I didn't know how to take notes. It's interesting, you know, when your element changes. So graduated from Georgia and we got married in that summer of 1987. And from there, we went in married housing at Georgia for a couple of quarters. I got to stay behind and be what was called the Gold Bar recruiter before reporting over to Fort Rucker, Alabama for flight school. And Camille had 2 more quarters. Back then it was quarter versus semester system. She had 2 more quarters of pharmacy school to do. So anyway, we
that
got
would have
out of
put you
college and go to
in
Georgia.
Fort Bragg. That would have put you in 1985. Is that right? 1986, maybe?
I was it was the summer of
86.
It was the summer of 1986. And then we got married the next summer, which was the summer of 87. So
I was born in 1986, and my dad was 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg all the way
Really?
until I was born. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
So you guys were there around the same time.
That is cool.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, we
That's
sure
pretty
were.
cool.
And golly, so I've definitely dated myself. So we are at Rucker. I'm in flight school, and I have to tell you, it was everything that I imagined. When you go there, you have to go through another 3 or 4 month indoctrination into Army aviation course where you're not flying or learning about helicopters. Just almost felt like a repeat of ROTC stuff. But when I finally got into the classroom, and it was 2 weeks of learning basic fundamentals of aeronautics and helicopter flight and helicopter components and all that stuff, you know, we were all sitting there just chomping at the bit to get to the flight line and finally get to touch a helicopter. And it felt like the 2 weeks was more like 2 years. But then we finally got there. I finally got to get in the cockpit of a helicopter, and the instructors take you up on what they call a nickel ride to somewhat give you a little bit of an orientation and show it to you. And I have to tell you, when I'm interested in something, I do well in it. I mean, an example is genetics. I made an A in genetics in college, and everybody else was failing it because I just thought it was cool. And I would study it and learn it. It was the same way. I took the helicopters in the same way. And it was interesting to see how it shifted. And Camille, we would sit there at dinner, and you had to memorize everything. You had to memorize limitations. In the helicopter operating manual, you got chapter 5 and 9. 5 is limitations, 9 is emergency procedures. Everything had to be committed memory. So we'd sit there at dinner with flashcards because there were no kids in our life. We had a dog named Charlie, and that was it. And we'd sit there over dinner, and Camille would just go one flashcard after the other. You know, what's the transmission limitations, all this stuff, torque limitations. Same with the EPs, emergency procedures.
I knew it as well as he did.
Yeah, she did. And I'd miss one, and we'd be in the car doing it, and Camille would say, "Hey, you skipped something." I'm like, how do you know? Well, in the process of calling everything out to me, she knew it. And we left there, we get sent to El Paso, Texas after I graduated. I did get the opportunity in flight school to choose what helicopter I wanted to fly, and I went guns. So in the CAV, we say go guns or go home. So my son's an Apache pilot, or our son's an Apache pilot. You're welcome. Anyway, it's just part of the culture of who we were, and I chose the Cobra over the Apache, and I'm still lucky enough to be flying the Cobra for the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation down in Atlanta. Another gift from God to be able to do that. But we get to El Paso, and we finally decide to start a family. We've been married 3 years at this point, and Camille gets pregnant with Mallory, and I had been an attack platoon leader, and they moved me over to the aviation unit maintenance group. And in that job, I had the opportunity to go back to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and get qualified to be a maintenance test pilot and an aviation maintenance officer. So we had this plan. We had it all figured out. Camille was like 8 months pregnant when I was supposed to report. And it was like a 4-month course, as I recall, 4 or 5 months. So I'm driving to Fort Eustis, Virginia from El Paso in my truck. It's loaded down with everything we need to get an apartment. And we had already contacted the military, and Camille's going to come on, and we're going to deliver the baby there at the hospital. And I'm listening to the news, and this country called Iraq has decided to invade Kuwait. And I mean, that's all it was on the radio was the news of this invasion. And I'm just listening to it and honestly not thinking much of it. There were no cell phones still. I get to Eustis, and I called back, and Camille's all just in a fit. She goes, I'm thinking they're going to call you home and you're going to get deployed. And the next famous comment will live in infamy in our home.
They'll send the Girl Scouts before they send us, is what he said.
Ah.
Don't worry.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't work out that way. And here's why. The 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment had been around forever, since the horse soldiers. But tanks, engineers, all of that, well, they had just stood up the aviation squadron about 18 months before. And we were still a young novice unit. We didn't even have all the aircraft we were supposed to have. We didn't have the parts we needed. The aircraft we did have had maintenance issues. We were a FAD 4 unit, which meant we were the last to get anything. I mean, it's going to the 82nd, it's going to the 101st, going to everybody before we get it. And if somebody just happened not to need it, then we would get the part we needed. So I made that comment in all sincerity that they'll send the Girl Scouts before they send us because we're not ready. Well, move forward 2 weeks, and I get a message to call back to the unit, and I get my commander on the phone, Captain Lou Huzella, and he goes, "Jeff, I didn't want to do this, but you got to come home." And I said, "What?" He goes, "We're going." And I literally said, "How is that possible?" He said, "Well, another unit had been pencil whipping," which is, you guys understand that. pencil whipping their operational readiness rates. And when they told them to load up, all of a sudden, none of their stuff works. Well, we've been telling the truth the whole time, and the Army knows what we need in order to get ready. And he said, we've had C-141s and C-5s landing here every day with parts and everything we need to get our aircraft up. Load up, come home. So here we go. Our whole plan's now been blown up. I load the truck. I drive back to El Paso. It takes a couple of days.
And we were like, we're having a baby.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
we're having a baby.
Yeah.
So, I'm just a kid. That's another, here we go, perspective. How old was
We didn't know we were kids.
We didn't know we were kids. We were in your young 20s. I'm sorry. In perspective, you were still a kid.
You were 25.
I was 25. You need your mom and dad, and you think you're an adult. I think you guys would agree. I thought I was an adult, but I learned quickly through life that 25, you're still young and still don't know a whole lot of stuff. But I get back and we're ready to deploy. And Colonel Webb, my commander, calls me to the office, and what he told me then doesn't exactly match with what he told us about 2 years ago. But he said, I'm going to do everything I can to delay. Camille's so close to having your child. We're going to put you on the last plane. You're going to be the rear detachment officer. You bring up the rear, but don't you dare miss that flight. And here we go. So the clock was ticking. Camille's a week overdue, and she's at the hospital. I'm leaving this was like the 11th of October, and my flight's on the 13th. So needless to say, oh yeah. So Camille got a hold of me, and now cell phones have shown up. So in that emergency deployment, I actually was walking around with a cell phone, and
You had a pager.
a pager or something, and she called me or paged me, and I called over to the hospital, and she goes, they're getting ready to induce me. Get over to the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and Mallory's born. And I get to spend that night pretty much with she and Mallory, and the next day, and my mom's flown in from planes, and she's going to be the get them home from the hospital solution. Mom and I go to eat dinner, and I literally sat there sobbing like a 3-year-old in a cafeteria that night. And Mom couldn't understand, what are you thinking about? What's wrong? I said, Mom, I've got to go back to the hospital and say bye to them because I can't do it the morning I'm meeting my soldiers and getting on a plane. And she said, why? And I said, because everything I got from Daddy, my heart came from you. I am an emotional wreck, and I have got to get it together. I'm leading people. I cannot be an emotional wreck when I help them get on a plane because they're going to be, some of them, in an emotional. I can't be that guy. I've got to be the leader they're looking for. So I went to the hospital, explained that to Camille and Mallory. The next morning, I learned another life lesson. I get up, and I've got all my bags are packed. I'm ready to go, and Mom's standing in our kitchen in our quarters. She's the one sobbing like a 3-year-old. And I said, Mama, what in the world? And she said, essentially, I can't use Mama spit to stop this from happening. And we all know what that means coming from the South. I mean, mamas could cure the mange with mama spit.
Yes.
She couldn't stop it. And I remember looking at her, and I said, Mom, I knew what I was signing up for when I did this. I'm going to be okay. God has a plan. And I left, naturally she got me crying when I didn't want to be upset. I sucked it all up, got in the truck, headed out to Biggs Army Airfield, got on the plane, and 24 hours later, I'm in the middle of Saudi Arabia, ready to go to what, I don't know what's going to happen, a war.
But 30 years later.
Yeah. 30 years later, you're going to get me going. 30 years later, our son gets deployed. And
to a potential war.
And I'm Mom. But interestingly, I just found a letter that I wrote Mom in 1992. So this happened in 1990. I wrote Mom a letter in 1990, and they didn't throw anything away. And I stumbled across it in planes just last week. And Camille and I were safing our house for Mallory, who by now is almost a 2-year-old toddler. So we're going around putting all the electrical socket outlet covers in, doing all of that stuff. and this light goes on in my head. And honestly, guys, I forgot I wrote Mom this letter. And I said, Mom, I finally get it. Your kids are always your kids. It doesn't matter how old they get, you're always their parent. So I didn't remember having written that letter. I just saw it literally last week. But here I am, 30 years later, getting ready to put Jay on a plane to potentially go to war. This was when we killed that Iranian general. And he got immediately sucked up because he was in the 217 Cav, or 117 Cav rather, at Bragg. And he's going. And I'm thinking, I can't stop this. And I'm sitting there telling him, I want to go in your place. And he's like, why, Dad? And I said, I'm X number of years old. I've had a good life. I can still fly. You stay here and raise your family. Let me go fight this war. You know, it's an impossible thing to even imagine. But I was in Mom's frame of mind. And all it did was solidify in my mind for parents. If you don't realize it now, you will quickly. Those kids are yours until you're gone. And I don't care if you're 50 or 60 when it happens, you're their baby. And it ain't going to change.
Oh, yeah.
So over the years, you have been documenting all these things that have happened. You were journaling, you were documenting all these things. What made it turn into a book?
I don't know. I would put things out on Facebook and write little short stories on Facebook. And I was getting a lot of feedback from people going, Jeff, you should write a book. So at some point, about 2.5 years ago, I'm an early riser. I'm got that curse and disease of 5 o'clock in the morning, no alarm needed. I'm getting up, you know, and I would get up and I was journaling. And interestingly, I was journaling in somewhat of a chronological sequence and kept getting that word, hey, you should write a book. So I somewhat finished it. I think I got to within a couple of chapters probably of having a complete story written. And I asked a friend of mine named Ronnie Burnish, I said, you know, Ronnie, will you kind of take a stab at editing this thing, but I need you to tell me something. And she said, what? I said, if it stinks, please have the courage to tell me it stinks. I don't want to publish a book that will embarrass my family or me. If it's no good, please tell me. Well, beyond, this is a funny part, and you'll see in the foreword that I wrote, apologize to Ronnie, because when I write, I use this thing called the dash button to be fluid in thought. You know, blah, 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 dash, blah, 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 dash. And Ronnie read the book and started the editing, and she met me at a Chamber of Commerce meeting and handed it back. She goes, let me tell you something. You're onto something here. This is a very good book, but I swear to God, I'm going to come to your house and tear the dash button off every keyboard that you use. And I'm like, oh, mercy. So at that point, I sent the manuscript to a friend of mine that I went to college with named Chris Gates. Chris is a published author and he's very gifted. He's a great writer. He wrote The Rain. He just published last year or two ago, a book called Moonshine Over Georgia. His grandfather was a revenuer and was actually involved in, if you've ever seen the movie, what is it, Bridge Over...
The Murder in Coweta.
Murder in Coweta County. His
Andy Griffith. With Andy
Griffith. His grandfather was actually the revenuer that found the truth behind all of that stuff, and they don't mention him in that movie, but Chris wrote a fictional, truthful book about that, and it's great. It's called Moonshine Over Georgia, and it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Chris.
But the reason you wrote this book is because, and the reason you were journaling is because you were wrestling with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the reason behind the book.
We've had, death by 100 million paper cuts, but predominantly dealing with our daughter's illness, which started when she was 5 years old. Camille and I both, we'll always have some trauma associated with navigating that process, and we're still dealing with it. Mallory will live with us. She's special needs adult now, but she was normal till 5. there was that, and then there were things that went on in the military. I lost one of my soldiers, unfortunately, in a helicopter crash, and he was in the seat I was supposed to be in, and I had that, has been buried down deep for a long time. I mean, that's just, you've heard of survivor's remorse. I've had survivor's remorse since 1990, and it's a true thing. And especially when a really good person dies and they were in your spot, we just got confused in the rotation of pilots at a firing range, and Rick wound up in the seat I was supposed to be in, and I wound up in his seat, and the aircraft he was flying had a compressor stall that led to a crash sequence, and he didn't survive, unfortunately. And he and I were friends, and his wife was friends, and that's laid out in the book as well, how all that went down. But I was just trying to get it all out and write something that maybe someday my son might pick up, or a grandchild, and read that, hey, here's where it kind of started and what happened. But when Chris got his hands on it, same thing happened. Chris said, man, this is good stuff. And he worked on it a bit and helped me smooth out. He came back, Laura and Justin, and said, the secret sauce is Camille. Camille needs to take this thing, and she's a gifted writer, and she needs to make it work. And that led to probably the last year that we were working on the book, and we were struggling with telling the story, particularly about Mallory, and threading the needle. And I want to share with you how that all came to be. When I started writing the book, it's now very much a faith-based novel, book, biography, whatever you want to call it. It was telling the story, but again, with that word perspective, I went back and just reflected on how God put so many people in my life that helped me achieve everything I wanted, helped me get to that next step. And in the writing, I was honoring them, and I really didn't even realize it. I was writing about all these people that had been such a powerful influence in my life, and starting with my dad. And I'm down in Plains, and I ran into a high school classmate and his wife, whom I'd never met, I don't think, at a restaurant. And she grabbed me and she said, when are you going to publish your book? I've been waiting. And I said, well, Camille and I are working on it. She goes, get it done. And I'm like, jeez, okay. So it's about an 8-hour drive from Plains to our home in North Carolina. And I called Camille and told her that. And I said, we've got to get this done. Where are you? What's going on? She goes, I just haven't figured out how to thread it all together. And
Well, it needed a theme, and so on that long drive, we're talking back and forth, and I said, well, the biggest theme in our life, since we've been together, has been aviation. It has been there from the beginning all the way through.
And
I
God.
said, well, God goes without saying, but I said, but the theme, because I always felt it should talk about our faith, because we didn't get through Mallory's illness without our faith and trusting God, but
or anything for that.
or anything. But I said, can't you use? I said, I don't know maybe the helicopter terms, but can't you relate terms in the helicopter to our lives, and we'll go that route. So that's how finally it all came together. And the leading edge is the leading edge of a rotor blade, which in real life was Jeff's dad, was his leading edge, that first example that he followed. Our trailing edge, the trailing edge of the rotor blade, is our son. And Jeff's life is the cord line that runs between the two on a rotor blade.
Yeah. That's an imaginary line.
So that's how we...
The leading edge is the strongest part of the blade. It strikes the air first. And I thought about and reflected that Dad was my leading edge out of the chute, but he showed me Jesus early. And he lived his life very much in honor of God. I mean, people ask me about being a godly man, and in his recent death, I said to somebody, you probably met the closest thing to Jesus you're ever going to see in my dad. And it was one of his caregivers, because all she could talk about was how wonderful he was and all of this and that and the other. And I said, Dad, I never heard him swear. I never heard him saw him treat anybody with disrespect. He's so respected in the community. He was a leader in the church from 1961 there in Plains until he died last month. He was somebody everybody could count on, but Daddy showed you Jesus, and it wasn't overtly an in-your-face kind of thing. It's just how he led his life. And I'm like, we all should try to strive for that. And I've never met that mark, but it was a mark well placed. And so the book, we struggled with the leading edge or my leading edge, and we finally came to the realization that the book is about my life, our life, and Jesus Christ is my leading edge. So in the sense of how it correlated to aviation, if you look at every chapter of the book has an aviation related title, like Life on the Farm is called Pre-Flight. So that's where it all kind of starts. And then you go to Crank. Crank is leaving home and going to college. And at the last chapter of the book is Engine Shutdown. And I actually put in the emergency procedures, like when Mallory got sick. That chapter is called Auto Rotation. So the engine has quit and we're headed for the ground. And you better know the procedure and know what to do.
Well, and a child's illness, I mean, it's hard for anybody, and it throws you for a loop, anybody for a loop. But for Jeff, who was what was your thing? Missions task?
Task mission standard.
He's like, you do this, this, and that, and it's fixed. And for the first time in his life, that didn't work.
No.
We had to totally put our trust and faith in God.
We were out of control. I mean, we liken it in the book to for a pilot, when it's CAVU, ceilings and visibility unlimited, and you're flying along straight and level and everything's going great, you just don't you don't know what's coming until it smacks you.
Yes.
And man, when it smacks you and it's one of your kids,
oh man,
have mercy, right? So
yeah, there's nothing that can compare to that. So Mallory, she came down with an illness when she was 5 years old. What was? I know you'll talk about it a lot in the book, but like, what exactly is it?
She came down with the doctors use this term catastrophic epilepsy. It took them a good bit of time to finally categorize it. She ultimately was diagnosed with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, but she's very atypical. Most Lennox-Gastaut kids can't talk, can't walk, that kind of thing.
She was very smart, even in spite of all of the untamed electrical activity going on in her brain and having gone into status epilepticus multiple times. Doctors literally would think they were in the wrong exam room when they would see her EEG charts on the door, and EEGs.
Because they would look at that first, and then they'd come in to see her, and the physical person they saw sitting there did not match what they were reading on their EEGs.
The EEGs, when they put all the probes on your head and they see all the electrical activity going on, and they would think they're in the wrong room. And eventually we had to almost start saying, this is Mallory, you're in the right room, because they'd make up some lame excuse.
They'd make us redo all the tests.
Yeah.
We'd have to go put her on an EEG and have them do their own tests.
Oh yeah, they couldn't believe it.
Because they thought the wrong records had been sent from the other hospital.
And she just out of nowhere, when she was 5 years old, just started having seizures?
So you're either born with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, or it hits you just like it hit her at about the age of 5 to 6. And it's 3% of kids fall into that category. We're experts in it now, and experts in epilepsy, unfortunately.
I'm sure.
But it put us on a mission, Justin, in later life. Camille's a pharmacist, and I spent 25 years in the industry. And what astounded us looking back is, we had to fight hard for Mallory. And what you will find when you read the book is we don't belabor the point too long. That's a whole nother story. But Camille and I got really good at this, and all we could ever think about is what happens to folks that don't have our education or our experience. Their kid would have wound up no telling in what condition, because they weren't able to do what we did. And I'll tell you, one of the secrets to this, Laura, lives in Macon, Georgia. Neurologist Sadir Athney. I was calling on him, and when Mallory first got sick, and we'd been at Emory and status epilepticus twice. It was horrible. We thought
Things
she
were
was
really heading
Oh,
down.
we were heading downhill in a hurry. And I called on Dr. Anthony, and he said, "How you holding up?" And I told him the truth. I said, "It's where we are. I don't know what to do next." And I asked him a pivotal question that changed everything. I said, "Dr. Anthony, what would you do if this was your child?" And he thought about it for a second. He turned around to his library of books behind his chair, and he grabbed one off the shelf and said, "I would figure out a way to go see Elaine Wiley. She wrote the textbook in epilepsy, and she's at the Cleveland Clinic. I'd pull every string I had, and I would get Mallory in front of Elaine Wiley." And I literally walked out of his office and started making phone calls, because with my connection in pharmaceuticals, we had reps calling on the Cleveland Clinic. I had an appointment with her by close of business that day, and within probably the next 2 days, Camille and I were on the way to Cleveland with Mallory to go see her. And she is the one that made the diagnosis. I mean, we've been told Mallory was going to be fully retarded or dead within a year. That was the prognosis we'd been given. It was unacceptable to us, and we thought God had a bigger plan. When we saw Dr. Wiley, she said, "This isn't a degenerative brain disease, but it's bad. She's got Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. It's atypical," and then explained all of that. And then we went down the road of just trying to get the seizures under control. And that took a long time. Eventually, Mallory wound up on the ketogenic diet, which is biblical. You know, when people would go up on the mountain and fast and pray, they'd quit seizing, they'd come down, start eating again, seize again, back up the mountain. Well, what happens is when you're starving yourself, you go into ketoacidosis. And a very smart guy, I believe at Johns Hopkins, figured out how to create that environment without starving by just modifying your menus and small quantities of fat and high protein foods. You could slow down the seizure rate. It actually stopped Mallory from seizing for the most part for almost 3 years. So we went from your child's going to be fully retarded or dead in a year, degenerative brain disease, to
pretty much leading a normal life.
pretty much leading a normal life. So I'm like, okay, time to turn the career back on. We wind up in New York, and I'm working at the training department in New York, loving my job. Camille's doing pharmacy. Jay is on the scene now, and he's going to school and doing great. We were blessed by him. That's a whole nother.
But, I won't lie. As he approached the age of 5, we were holding our breath.
I'm sure you
I can
were.
imagine. Yeah,
We were just kind of,
sure.
yeah.
We're doing it with our grandchild right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going away. It's always a concern. Thankfully, he's an Apache pilot and perfect health and no issues, but you're scared to death. Here we go. If it happened to her, is it going to happen to him? And thank God it didn't. But Mallory was on the ketogenic diet while we were in New York. We're still seeing neurologists up there. It's still Lennox-Gastaut. It's still atypical. And then one day the diet just quit working, and we went to spiking 100 to 150 seizures a day and back in the wheelchair. And the story that's in the book that really gets interesting started there. We heard about a doctor at Detroit Children's Hospital that was studying positron emission tomography PET scanning in order to identify the seizure foci in a brain and be able to go in and excise that or remove it and cure people. So we had a motorhome. We called it the Odyssey. Throughout Mallory's illness, I mean, without that thing, I don't know how we would have survived. But we go to Detroit. He decides she's not a candidate for surgery. We come back to New York. I'm on the phone with my managers at Pfizer going, "Hey, we just got to go home. We got to go back to Georgia, go back to Macon, go back anywhere where we've got family. We're going to need help." Because Mallory at this point is back in a wheelchair, basically with her head Velcroed to the back to keep her from lunging into stuff when she would have seizures and get head injuries. And we're done. And we got home and we sat down for dinner that night, and Mallory was at the chair, Jay and Camille and I, and the phone rang. And I don't even know why I answered it, because we were sitting there talking about how we were going to transfer back to Georgia.
We were so dejected.
We were so dejected, and frankly, we were sitting there having this isn't going to get better. In fact, it's going to get a lot worse, conversation. Phone rings, and I go and answer it, and the voice on the other end says, "Is this Jeff Moss?" I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Well, this is Dr. Arno Freed from Hackensack University Medical Center. I'm a neurosurgeon here, And I was wondering if you would give me an opportunity to see Mallory. Now, these phone calls were not atypical because Mallory is now a guinea pig, honestly. We were getting doctors all over the country wanting to see her because they wanted to see the seizure patterns of Lennox Gastaut and a smart kid that could walk, talk, and chew bubble gum and knew the continents of the earth. It's not something you see every day. And that's my initial gut, was to go there. And I told him the truth. I said, Dr. Freed, you know what, we're a little beyond that. We just literally walked in the door from Detroit. She wasn't a candidate for surgery, blah, blah, blah.
And we've just given up.
We're going home to Georgia. We are making those arrangements now, and we're just done. We've spent years trying to find a cure, and we're just done. And he said, then you have nothing to lose. If you will come here Monday morning at 9 a.m., I want to try to help your child. Like, I finally gave in and agreed. And I want y'all to know, when we got to Hackensack that Monday morning, we're walking down the hallway in his office. The woman behind the counter slid the glass open and said, "Are you the Mosses?" Yeah, because that call came on Friday night.
Well, I'm going to back him up. We were driving to the hospital.
That's true.
There were rainbows over the hospital. 2 rainbows.
Oh,
Oh,
you saw that
absolutely.
sign.
Oh, yeah. And then the window coming open, that was a first. And then they put us in Dr. Freed's office, and it was a rather large office, and it was littered on the walls with thank yous from families. Thank you for saving my kid's life, basically. And I'm walking around reading all that while we're waiting on him. And then the guy walks in, totally ignores Camille and I, and starts talking to Mallory. And he must have spoken to her 2 or 3 minutes. And he looked at us and said, to allow this child to continue to suffer is unacceptable. I want to try to help her. First time. In all those years, we had heard words like that. And we asked what that entailed, which was scary, craniotomy, all kinds of stuff, invasive, going inside to look. And we at that point, guys, we felt like we had to do something. We knew that it was only going to get worse if we did nothing. And we trusted Dr. Freed. We put her in the hospital. She had that first surgery. He removed a good portion of her left frontal lobe. Pfizer followed through, moved us back to Macon, and we went almost a year without a seizure to speak of. And she went back to normal classroom. She's making A's and B's again, and we're once again think we got the tiger by the tail. We can start living again. And it wasn't a year later that I'm at Lowe's and I hear that familiar ugh sound from the back seat of the car and look in the rearview mirror, and she's seizing, and here we go again. So then it's back to Hackensack for round 2. And we were in the hospital.
And this was August of 2000.
2001.
Yeah.
So we're in the hospital on 9/11 in Hackensack, right across the river from the World Trade Centers.
Oh, wow.
We were there through all of that. Mallory's having her second round of brain surgery was scheduled for 9/13. And they had come to us and expected mass casualties, which never materialized, and warned us, depending on what happens, we may have to push our surgery back a few days. And the casualties never showed up, as you well know. And she has a second surgery, and this one, they removed more of her left frontal lobe, and they did a 2/3 corpus callosotomy. So they separated the right and left hemispheres of her brain. So our superhighway is a dirt path for Mallory. So that caused her to be debilitated. I will tell you, here we are. That was 9/11/2001. It is now February of 2025. Mallory can walk, talk, chew bubble gum. She can sit here and solve a Wheel of Fortune puzzle faster than we can in a lot of cases. And she's having as normal a life as she can. She has seizures when she's sleeping every now and then, but not a lot when she's awake. And the glory goes to God for all of this. But when I'm finishing the book, Laura, and we figure out the thread, which is aviation and our relationship with Christ and all the wonderful people that were there for us, I unashamedly call them all out in the book and what they did for us. And
We tried to. We couldn't call everybody.
yeah, we couldn't, and that was another thing. I know there were people that aren't in there that probably should be, but a lot of people that influenced us in a very positive way that were the right leaders at the right time. The thing that will really come out to people if they read My Leading Edge is first and foremost that we know Jesus Christ is the ultimate leading edge. We know that we would not have the life we've had we not been people of faith, but also know we wouldn't have survived. And that in chapter 5, my relationship with a chaplain in the hospital is a pivotal point in the book where that chaplain asked me a question nobody had bothered to ask and then told me how to handle it. And I really don't want to give that up on a podcast.
Don't give it away on the podcast.
I want people to read it, but I have been able to help a lot of preachers because I've told them they need to ask that question out loud that was asked of me, because no Christian is going to openly admit to it. And that involves being angry with God. And it was consuming me because I could not understand. And all he asked me that night was, how are you handling your anger toward God? And I had a complete meltdown at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he told me in the Bible where the answers were. And I'm telling you, I don't know about the two of you, but that is a pivotal question that every pastor should ask somebody of the Christian faith that's going through trials and tribulations, because there's no way as a Christian you aren't sitting there wondering, what did I do to bring this down on myself? How have I fallen short to the point I'm being punished like this? How have I misinterpreted your role in my life or your providence in my life? Why are you punishing my child for something I did? It's the truth. So it's in there, and I wrote about it. And again, as Camille said, it was journaling to try to deal with all the feelings. But in the aftermath of that, the number one person I want to read this book are counselors, pastors, people that deal with folks like us, because we're telling you what it's like to be on the other side. And a lot of preachers have gone through this. My pastor, as a child, Myra Barrett's wife was tragically killed in a car wreck with her pregnant. And I know, even a pastor, there's no way that you don't look to heaven and say, why, God? Why? And that to me is pivotal. The power of prayer is emphasized in the book, and it's riddled with Bible verses that fell on us at these points that we were traversing our life that I think will be really meaningful to people when they sit there and they read it and they look at that and they say, wow, this is a very special verse to me. I can tell you that it starts and ends with John 3:16. In the forward, John 3:16 is quoted, and the final page, John 3:16 is quoted. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That is the foundational point of being someone of the Christian faith. So we knew that and we embraced it early on.
I want everybody to get this book.
I'm fixing to buy this book. I've only ever read one book in my life, and I'm about to read this book.
I told Jeff that. I told Jeff.
She did. She threw you under the bus, Justin. But I'm going to tell you something. I can't tell you how many people have said that and then read the book. And one of them is a good friend that lives here in North Carolina in our subdivision. His wife threw him under the bus. She goes, he is not a reader. And the minute the book showed up, he sat down and he almost read it cover to cover in probably 2 settings. And when he turned the last page, he looked at me and said, order a copy of this for every one of our kids. Yep. And that's God. We're not prolific writers. Camille is. I'm certainly not. I can spin a yarn and tell a tale, but writing it's a whole nother animal. Camille has the gift of the pen, and she took my journaling and she created a very readable, it's not perfect, but it's a very readable book. Every chapter is chock full of lessons learned where I just blatantly state, here's what this meant. This is what I learned from this experience. And I'll give you a simple one. Daddy told me to never hook an implement to a tractor that was running, because that's a lot of power, and if it jumps out of gear, it could crush you. I mean, he went through all of that detail, And I've seen that tragedy happen in my life where, tragic farming accidents people talk about. And every time I see somebody between a tractor and an implement or anything, I'm the first one to run over there and go, hit the kill switch. You've only got one life. It's not worth dying to save the moment it takes to hit the starter, right?
Right.
And crank something up. But I've got those lessons through there. And we call them moss sauce now. Daddy created barbecue sauce for chicken cues in Plains, Georgia, and they've been going on since 1975, 76. Thousands of gallons of Dad's moss sauce has been served. I'm trying to get us on the Shark Tank. Daddy told me that if I ever wanted to do something with it, I could, and I've got the recipe. So I want to go on and get a deal with one of the sharks to. I don't want to make it and sell it. I want to get a licensing agreement with Kraft or somebody to honor Dad. We lost him January the 20th. He was 94. We were blessed to have him that long, but I'm going to miss him.
I believe it.
I know
Absolutely.
you're going to miss him, and I think it's such a fabulous way that you've honored your father through this book. I mean, you've told your story, you and Camille, your story, your heartache, your overcoming of things, but then also in all of this, honoring your father and your mother. And I have not read the book yet. I've read some excerpts, but I can't wait to read the whole thing. It is available on Amazon. It's called My Leading Edge. You can find it on Amazon. You can order a copy. They'll have it to your house in about 2 days, right? So I encourage everyone to do that.
It was our goal. I guess back in the fall, I told Camille that if we don't get this published before Dad passes away, I'm going to be very upset because I wanted him to do it. And I've got video of Mom sitting there reading him the book. And we hit the goal. We put it in their hand. And actually, the first book signing we did was in Plains, and Mom and Dad were there. And they signed, everybody that showed up, I had Mom and Dad sign their copies. So there are a few people in Plains, Georgia that actually have Dad's autograph and Mom's in the book. But I wanted to share Dad with people. And he really, truly was the influence that got us to the name. Because I said, Dad blazed the trail. We were talking on that drive home from Plains. I said, Daddy blazed the trail for me. He wasn't the one that gushed over your accomplishments, but you knew he was proud of you. He just didn't express it like I do with my son. That was we all need to look at our parents and go, well, what am I going to do? I want to do everything they did great, and I want to add to it. And I gush over my son all the time because Dad just wasn't the kind to do that. But yeah, you could just tell. You could see it in his eyes. He's proud. Mom, on the other hand, yeah, she's there. She's in hospice right now. And I guarantee you, if I check the camera in Plains, she's got Dad's obituary and a copy of this book and Daddy's flag that was draped over his coffin at his funeral in her lap. And she's got short-term memory issues, but she'll go back and read a little bit. And, we're honored. Anybody, look, trying to get used to somebody saying, oh, Jeff and Camille, we want you to come to a book signing and sign our book. Like, my autograph's not worth a plug nickel, right? But if you want me to sign that book, I'm happy to do it. But, we just, I don't know. We're just kind of taken aback. But the books, it's getting out there, and I think that's God's plan. I want people to read it, and the biggest thing I want you to walk away from is not Jeff Moss was some kind of stud Army aviator. I want you to walk away from it with Jeff Moss believes in Jesus. And everything he did and this family accomplished was because they kept their eyes focused where they should be most of the time. And when they didn't, it just pointed out that we're fallible human beings, and there are no perfect people on earth. I have messed up royally in my life, but I've always tried to do the right thing. And that sometimes is good, sometimes maybe not so much. But I know the great work you two guys do down in Bibb County and up in Gray, and Justin, when I saw what you did raising money for the Children's Hospital, you got to know that made me grin, man, because
Thank
Mallory
you.
was in that hospital.
Yes,
She was
sir.
in that hospital. And
Those are some wonderful folks down there.
Yeah.
There's some wonderful people in there. So,
Yeah.
two questions I got. They're pretty simple questions because I know we're wrapping up here because we don't want to give too many details about the book because it sounds like it's better to read it anyway. But two questions I got a feeling everybody's wondering since your dad's from Plains and all that kind of stuff, and they were about the same age. A, were him and Jimmy Carter pals, and B, did they go to the same church?
Easy answer to the first one. Yeah, they were very good friends, and my mom was good friends. Like they were good friends as couples, and I mean they'd come over to the house even while he was president, after the presidency, and have dinner. Again, I don't know much about the political affiliations, but I know Dad had a huge amount of respect for President Carter. President Carter was a devout Christian. He taught Sunday school at Maranatha. Ms. Rosalind was raised in Plains Methodist Church, where I was raised. Her mother, Miss Allie Smith, was in the pew every Sunday.
And held Mallory. The first time Mallory ever went to church, he was in Desert Storm. I was in Plains with my new baby, and Miss Allie, Rosalind's mother, held her through the whole church service.
Yeah.
Wow.
Her first time in church.
Look, he commissioned me in the Army. He swore me in right after he'd come out of the White House, because he'd come out in 81. This was 1987. I'm at the Carter Center and had the unique opportunity that my commissioning down there where it says by the president was actually signed by Jimmy Carter in handwritten ink, at the dealing. So the unique experiences are a whole nother story. Some of them are outlined in the book, but yes, they were very close personal friends. Mom and Dad went to Ms. Rosalind's funeral. They were not healthy enough to go to Mr. Jimmy's, but my sister and I went in their place to Maranatha. But Jimmy,
Which is across the street.
It's across the street from my parents' home. Jimmy and Rosalind were married in Plains Methodist Church, and then she, unusually, because normally the husband goes with the wife, right? She goes to the Baptist church with him, and that I've never understood. Why wasn't he a Methodist, right, instead of a Baptist? But they were Baptist. And what was the second question? That was about their relationship, was it?
That was pretty much it.
The same church.
Was the Baptist church bigger than the Methodist church by a long shot?
The Plains Baptist Church was, but there was an event back during the election cycle in 1976 that caused a rift in the church, and it split. So Maranatha Church split off of Plains Baptist, and that therefore split the population of that church, and that happens every now and then.
I was about to say, because those politicians a lot of times pick their church. It might not have been because it was Rosalind. It might have been because that Baptist church had a lot more votes in there.
Well, it probably was bigger. I don't know. I'm just, everybody believed in Jesus, and that's the takeaway.
Right, that's right.
There you
We
go.
worship the same Jewish carpenter, right?
That's right.
All right. I do want to go ahead and let everybody know that I know that Jeff is a good pilot because back when he was working with the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation, I got to fly in a Huey helicopter with Jeff piloting. And that was very, very cool. So I can tell you that he's a good pilot. And also, I don't know that you mentioned this earlier, Jeff, but you did earn a Bronze Star in Desert Storm.
That's true. Not with V device, and I'm always sensitive about that because there's two different Bronze Stars. The Bronze Star for Valor means that you did something in combat to like charge a machine gun nest or something like that. The Bronze Star I earned was purely performance related. So it's not a Bronze Star with V device, but nonetheless, it's a Bronze Star, and it certainly is up there on the top row of.
The same one your dad earned.
Yeah, same one my dad earned in Korea. So when I was told I'm getting a Bronze Star, all I could think about is Dad got one in the Korean War. I can't believe that I'm going to have one as well. So we when we buried Dad, he had his Bronze Star on his lapel and his Lions Club pin on the other, because those were two things that were really meaningful to him. And I felt very important, that he have a military funeral, because his service in the Korean War, all of those folks what I did in Desert Storm, I've always felt pales in comparison to our Vietnam era veterans, our Korean War veterans, certainly World War I, World War II. I mean, it's unimaginable what those folks went through.
Oh yeah.
Well, we say to everybody, you included, thank you for your service, and also to your son.
Absolutely.
Yes, he's a good soldier, and Camille served too. I mean that's the ones that stay behind. A lot of times had it worse than those of us that ran it because they were wondering. And I was thinking the other day, Desert Storm was the first war that was broadcast 24/7 on TV. So we're in the fight, not knowing everybody's sitting at home watching it on TV, but it was quick, down, and dirty, to say the very least. By the time, we annihilated Saddam Hussein, and it was done in 3 days, the ground war at least. So we were over there and we got home pretty quick, unlike, again, Afghanistan. I mean, what those guys went through in Afghanistan is I can't imagine how any of them sleep through the night. It's tough.
All right. Thank you for taking time with us, both of you guys. It's been a pleasure. I do want to encourage everybody to go to Amazon.com, order the My Leading Edge book by Camille and Jeff Moss.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you guys ever, I know you got those family ties down in Gray. If you end up coming through anytime soon, y'all make sure to stop by the world's busiest Dairy Queen here in Gray, Georgia, because I want to buy you a blizzard. Okay?
Absolutely.
100%. In fact, last year's Moss family reunion was there, and I believe it's on the schedule to be there again this summer.
So we'll be there.
We will be there. Yeah.
Very good. Sounds like a plan. Well, guys, if you've been watching this podcast today and you're wondering what in the world, they look like everybody's in a different area. That's true. So I'm trying to, get another restaurant going. So I'm traveling the country over a 4-week period. Right now I'm in Las Vegas for 2 days for a convention, an equipment convention. Miss Laura is in Macon and they are in North Carolina. So over the next couple weeks, so we can facilitate this, we're going to have these Zoom type, broadcasts right here. But bear with us. In about 3 weeks, we will be back to business as normal. But I think this worked out pretty good. I appreciate you guys jumping in. And I mean, he's way, way ahead of the curve. He had that background ready to go. I mean, this is professional stuff. But like always, guys, we always like to tell you, if you can do something good, you should do something good. And we appreciate you guys.
We're all equal right now.